So it was February of 2001. I think, yeah, 22 years ago that I first met my wife, Erica. She was a senior at Howard University, and I was a rookie with the Washington Redskins at that particular time. Now they're the Washington Commanders. And we met at a skating rink. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole story of what happened and who connected with who. I'll just like let her tell that story at some point. If you don't know her and you don't get to hear that story, then it's all good. But I remember just feeling like, okay, man, this might be somebody that I really want to get to know. I did a little research to find out, if she had a boyfriend and all that sort of stuff. And fast forward a couple of weeks, I eventually got her phone number and realized that, like, yeah, this is someone that I want to really, really get to know. As a matter of fact, I told one of my closest friends, I said, hey, write this down. I don't even really know this girl, but I think I'm gonna marry her. And in that moment, I don't know that I really knew that that was gonna happen, but here's what I knew. I knew that Erica needed to be a significant part of my life. As a matter of fact, as I got to know her and as I got to spend time with her, I began to feel like Erica needs to be, or is going to be, essential to my life. All of these other relationships maybe I had before, this was something very different. And it reminds me of what we're going to be talking about for the next 7 weeks, and that's prayer. And that might sound like a little strange and a little interesting, but here's why I say that. Prayer is, or I should say, hasn't been, for many of us who are followers of Jesus, or maybe you're not a follower of Jesus, but you kind of know of prayer. But for those who follow Jesus, prayer should be an essential part of our lives and not just an accessory or an activity as part of our lives. When I think about my relationship with my wife, which we'll be married for 20 years, this year, she is essential to my life. Like, she's not an accessory, and spending time with her is communing with her. And that's what prayer is. It's communing with God. It's these intimate moments, intimate conversations that we have with God. And I think the challenge for many of us is, it's what Sky Jethani says in his book, What If Jesus Was Serious About Prayer? He says that for many of us, prayer has been in parentheses in our lives. And I was an English major in college, and so when you think about parentheses, from a grammar standpoint, it is not essential to the sentence. So you could actually have the sentence and then you could have the parentheses. If you left it off, it really wouldn't have much impact on the sentence. And I think that's where prayer is in most of our lives. Fundamentally, prayer is essential to the believer in Jesus to have our absolute best life. But I'm not sure that we really understand that. And I think part of the reason for that is, we're actually bombarded by thousands of messages every day. It's called marketing. I think anywhere from like 4 to 10,000 messages a day. And these messages are basically presenting some product or some idea to us that is essential in our lives. That's basically what they're marketing to us and what they're saying. And I don't think that we see prayer as an essential part of our lives. I think we kind of put it in these other categories that are more of an accessory, and we don't see it as essential to thriving or us having our best life. And I think the main reason for that is because we really don't understand prayer. Let me put it to you like this. I remember when I first came to understand a little bit more about sleep. Now, everybody knows that sleep is important. You need to get sleep every day. Like, your body is like literally going to shut down. So you have to get sleep. But I think some of us are just, our thought process about it, just like mine was just like, yeah, I mean, like, sleep is sleep. Yeah, you should sleep for a certain amount of time. But here's what I didn't know, because I had this casual mindset about sleep. The truth is that sleep is more than rest. It provides an opportunity for your body to actually repair itself. And did you know that when you sleep between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., your body releases high levels of HGH, human growth hormone, which is the thing that actually fixes your body. But here's the thing. It's about good quality of sleep, and you have to be at a certain stage of sleep in order for those HGH hormones to be released at its highest capacity. And so what that means is that you've got to have a powering down process in order to get to that stage of sleep. Listen, the only thing I'm trying to say is I changed my mindset about sleep and how essential it is to my thriving, my physical health. And so I prioritized it differently because my mindset was changed differently. And I hope that in this series that your mindset is changed about prayer and that you come to understand its impact on us spiritually, and that you prioritize it in a different way. So what if I told you that prayer is more than an activity, it's more than an agenda item, it's more than an action item? What if I told you that following Jesus the way that he asked us to is actually not possible without prayer? That's a little jarring, isn't it? And I think it's jarring because most of our lives, even in our spiritual lives, is centered around activity. I love what Pete Scazzaro says in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. We have become accustomed to doing more for God activity than being with God, which is communion. And so just two goals in this series: that you would be enlightened and have more depth of understanding, and that you would engage differently as a result of this series. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at Luke chapter number 11. This is a passage, and it's a little long, verses 5 to 13. I want to read it for you, but I think it unpacks for us a couple of things that I want to highlight as we kick off this first message in this series. So here we go. I'm reading from the CSB version. He also said to them, this is Jesus speaking to his disciples, suppose one of you have a friend and goes to him at midnight and says to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread, because a friend of mine on a journey has come to me and I don't have anything to offer him. Then he will answer from inside and say, don't bother me. The door is already locked and my children and I have gone to bed. I can't get up and give you anything. I tell you, even though he won't get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his friend's shameless boldness, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be open. What father among you, if his son asks for a fish, will give him a snake instead of a fish? Or if he asks for an egg, will give him a scorpion? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will the Heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him? Very simple title to this opening message in this opening series about prayer. What is prayer? That's just a simple question that we want to ask in this message. What is prayer? I think after reading this passage, there could be a little bit of confusion in terms of like, okay, what does this passage have to do with prayer? How does this passage answer the question, what is prayer? Well, it doesn't directly per se, but it actually pulls out a couple of things that I want to highlight about prayer. But first, before we do that, I think we need to understand what's happening here. Jesus is communicating in the way that he's communicating to his disciples because previously or prior to verse number 5, the disciples asked Jesus, hey, can you teach us how to pray? They heard Jesus praying, which was very different than what they knew. It was not formal, which would have been Hebrew. So Jesus was not praying in Hebrew. Jesus spoke in the language that's called Aramaic, which is a more common language. And so Jesus is already presenting a level of or a level of prayer or communication that is not formal. It's foreign in terms of what they would have known. And so they're asking Jesus to teach them to pray. He does, and then he continues on to help them understand like what it means to pray. Now, prior to this, when they asked Jesus to teach them how to pray, Jesus then goes through the Lord's Prayer. Week 3, we'll be going through the Lord's Prayer, so we won't talk about that right now. But here's what I want to highlight for us from this passage that we just read. And I'm just going to answer the question straight out in terms of what is prayer. And it's simply communion with God. I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about my relationship with my wife, Erica. Communion is just these simple, intimate moments, conversations. It's spending time. And that's what relationships are built on. They're built on connection. And what Luke chapter 11, verses 5 through 13, what we read, what it is elevating for us is the depth of relationship. And on the surface, it seems like Jesus is talking about, well, prayers, asking, seeking, and knocking. And yes, to a certain degree, but Jesus is not highlighting a focus on or a response to a formula, rather a response of a friend and the Father or God the Father. And so there are two aspects of communion. So prayer is communion with God. I think there are two aspects of communion that we see in this passage that we just read. The first one is proximity. In verses 5 through 8, Jesus is highlighting the relationship between two friends. And specifically, there's a friend that is in need. He's asking another friend. And Jesus says this: the friend gives to his friend just because they're friends. It's an inconvenient time. He doesn't want to be bothered. But because he is a friend, he lets himself be bothered. I know we got a short list of people that it could be an inconvenient time. We might even fuss with them about it. Like, yo, man, like, why you bother me right now? Like, this is not a good time. But because it's a friend, you would do it because of who is asking. And what this says is that our proximity to people, our relationship, our closeness, it matters. Our response matters. And so this is what prayer does. Prayer increases our proximity and it establishes deeper communion. And so that's what it means. Now, it doesn't mean in terms of prayer that God, won't respond if we're not in regular communion. God often does that. But what it does mean is that God desires deep communion with us. And that's the whole reason why Jesus came to earth. So the first thing about communion is proximity, and that's what we're seeing in the first half of this text. I think the second thing that we're seeing is this idea of pursuit. In verse 9 through 13, Jesus encourages the disciples to pursue. This is where he's talking about asking, seeking, knocking, and the door will be open. Well, the reason for this is because this has everything to do with relationship, it has everything to do with communion, right? Verse 11 says Jesus points out the heart of God, the Father here. And he says, basically, if you're pursuing me, why would I give you bad things? Like Jesus, like, what father would give his children bad things if they asked them? He wouldn't. He's like, even those of you who are evil, you would give good gifts to your children. And so part of what we need to understand here is that prayer is pursuing the heart of God and the good things, the good gifts he has for us. It doesn't mean that we get what we want, because listen, I'm a father of 4 kids and they ask me for stuff all the time. Like, I ain't giving them stuff that they don't need, you know what I'm saying? I ain't giving them, excess amounts of candy, and because they don't know that's bad for their teeth, but I know it's bad for their teeth. But I am constantly trying to give them good things. And so I might give them an alternative. I might give them something else instead of candy, because I want to give them good things. And because they pursued me and they asked, I want to try to give the best that I have to offer. And this is what it means to pray. We increase our proximity to God and we continue to pursue him. And out of that communion flows good things that God has for us. Speaking of relationships, as I've been talking about my relationship with my wife, and we've been talking about prayer as it relates to this idea of communion with God, which is about relationship. Well, one of the things that I have been fascinated by, and not in a good way, is how people can be married for 30, 40, 50 years and eventually get divorced. As a matter of fact, the statistics show that people who are in the age range of like 50 to 70, the divorce rate is actually double what the average rate is, which the average rate isn't good right now. It's anywhere between 40 and 50% of all, first-time marriages end in divorce, which is a whole separate conversation. But specifically as it relates to people who've been married for so many years, what one of the number one things or number one reasons why this happens is said because they desire to live a more authentic life. Think about that for a second. You've been in this relationship and it hasn't been authentic, or there's been this slow drift. And one of the reasons I think that happens is because there's a decrease in proximity and there's a decrease in pursuit. Like the closeness as you evolve as a couple, and the pursuit of one another, it wanes. And one of the bigger reasons for that is because we have these different activities that we're engaged in, but we're not actively engaged with one another. And so then it provides this, or creates this slow drift. And as a matter of fact, during the pandemic, when couples had to be together and their activities were reduced, and they weren't able to get out and be fulfilled enough, they found out that they weren't fulfilled in these relationships. And I think the same thing happens in our relationship, in our communion with God. If there isn't regular proximity, if there isn't regular pursuit, our relationship wanes. It doesn't grow. And we fill our lives with all of these different activities, and we're distracted by them. And they're no longer, or they don't fulfill us or fill us the way that we would hope. But you know what Jesus said. He promised a full life if we're in communion with him. Listen to what he said in John 6, verse 35. He says, I am the bread of life. No one who comes to me, that's pursuit, will ever be hungry, and no one who believes in me will ever be thirsty again. That's the promise that Jesus offers us. And prayer is a big part of staying in communion with God, which is all prayer is. So I hope that you are encouraged and that you have a little bit more clarity on what prayer means. And as we go through this series, we're going to practically unpack many other areas as it relates to prayer. And I'm excited about how you're going to be able to adjust or be encouraged and inspired to adjust your priorities and see prayer as essential to our thriving and having our best life.